Welcome to The Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with the main stories in the global economy. Today's magazine: Vancouver's Olympic Village served as a warning to Sochi, and Burmese train themselves to surface and repair new technologies. First, a look at the headlines. China and Taiwan began the highest level talks since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. Beijing is expected to push Taiwan to pass a free trade deal that is currently stalled in parliament. Cross-strait ties have improved since Taiwan's pro-Beijing president Ma Ying-jeou was elected in 2008, including a boom in cross-strait tourism and trade agreements. But sensitivities remain as Beijing insists Taiwan is part of its territory, and Taipei nominally claims the same territory as Beijing, although it does not press these claims. Swiss voters approved the implementation of a controversial immigration cap that violates a Swiss-EU agreement on immigration and market access. Industries ranging from banking to construction are likely to be affected by the Stop Mass Immigration measure. The measure requires the government to implement quotas on foreign workers within 3 years. Many Swiss companies, particularly in the banking and pharmaceutical industries, depend on skilled executives from abroad. Switzerland's manufacturing and agricultural industries export more than half of the country's $224 billion in annual exports to the EU.
L'aspect des relations internationales de la Suisse.
Of course, this will put Switzerland in a weaker negotiating position when it comes to international relations with the European Union and beyond. We will no longer be able to see the evolution of agreements in the way that we used to, because we will no longer know if partners are trustworthy or not on the side of the European Union. This will have an impact on enterprises because the framework conditions won't be the same.
Les quotas uniformes sont la pire des solutions.
Numbered quotas are a terrible idea because they are inefficient and because they run contrary to both the rights and economic interests of countries that practice them.
EU foreign ministers threatened Ukraine with sanctions if violence against demonstrators persists. Protesters blame security forces for abductions, attacks on protesters, and torching of their cars. At least 6 people have died in clashes between demonstrators and riot police in Kiev since protests erupted 3 months ago. EU ministers also offered the possibility of closer ties to the EU by saying the proposed trade pact was not the final goal in EU-Ukraine cooperation, implying the possibility of eventual EU membership.
Personne ne voulait des sanctions immédiates et générales. Par contre,
nobody wanted immediate and general sanctions. However, we decided to refer to targeted sanctions if ever the situation becomes worse, which is not the case now. By doing so, we want to send a clear signal, a clear message addressed to those the sanctions would target. We're looking at things closely. We asserted the strengthening of democracy. Obviously, these sanctions could target those who do not favor the path toward democracy.
Mass protests rock the streets of Bosnia as workers say they cannot cope anymore with years of unemployment. Demonstrations began with a protest by workers from idle factories in Tuzla, spreading to Sarajevo and other towns. The badly managed transition to capitalism and the dysfunctional system of ethnic power sharing lies at the base of the country's industrial failure. The complex and ineffective setup has scared off foreign investors and stifled governance. 27% of Bosnia's workforce is unemployed, or 40% including those who scrape together a living in the grey economy.
I think what happened there is a wake-up call to the European Union and to the international community. We need to focus more effort on helping Bosnia towards the European Union, towards NATO membership, so that the stagnation in Bosnian politics and government can come to an end. And I think this will become a more important issue.
I am here to express my support for the citizens of Bosnia Herzegovina who are suffering terrible humiliation. They are starving while their completely irresponsible government is doing nothing.
Ghana's central bank tightened restrictions on foreign currency purchases in the country in an effort to curb the depreciation of the local currency. High imports have increasingly weighed on the cedi, pushing it down 20% since last year. In an additional measure, the Bank of Ghana also increased the policy rate by 200 basis points to 18% last week. But the ratings agency Fitch said Ghana's budget deficit and current account deficit are the root cause of domestic macroeconomic imbalances. Concerns about funding twin deficits in excess of 10% of GDP have weighed on the currency, which fell 14.6% in 2013 and dropped a further 7.8% so far in 2014. And protesters returned to the streets of Rio de Janeiro to demonstrate against a recent public transportation rate hike. Brazil has witnessed a slate of violent protests over a general increase in living expenses, while the government spends billions to prepare for the World Cup. Activists claim the disproportionate use of police violence has claimed the lives of many protesters. Many activist groups have promised big protests when the World Cup begins June 12th and as the country prepares for elections. As the Olympics are in full swing in Sochi, Vancouver's Olympic City serves as a warning to the Russian city on which as much as $51 billion were spent. The following report takes a closer look.
The pulse might be slower, but Vancouver's Olympic Village does still have a heartbeat these days. More than 700 downtown waterfront apartments were built to house the 2010 Winter Olympic athletes. When the Olympic flame went out and the 2,100 athletes left, the village flatlined. Many of the premium apartments sat empty or unsold. Kyle and Yumi were some of the first to move in.
When we moved here in 2011, it felt like a ghost town. There was not an enormous amount of businesses open in the area.
Canada aimed to prove they could hold the games on the cheap. Some $7 billion to Sochi's $51 billion. They still hoped that hosting the Olympics would give them the chance to undertake big infrastructure projects that would leave a positive social and economic legacy.
The Olympic Village was always sort of promoted as potentially a jewel of Vancouver's Olympic experience. It would be a new kind of housing, it would be green housing, it would be a new neighborhood in what had been before more of an industrial area.
All good intentions, but the sums didn't add up, leaving Vancouver's taxpayers with a legacy of debt.
It was a perfect storm. We had a deadline we couldn't skip. We had a global economy collapse. The previous council had been too excited about the big value of the land and sold it for a very high price. And all of those factors came together, incurring significant losses.
Those losses are estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Vancouver's real estate is among the world's most expensive, and the city has the largest homeless population in Canada. Original plans for the premium housing development had set aside 40% of the units for low-income housing. But in a bid to make up its losses, the city reduced that to 10%.
It's continued to increase every year. Personally, I pay, about 75% of my income in rent. And a lot of people have left. It's a little bit lonely. I miss my friends, but people can't afford it. They just can't afford it.
Some apartments are listed for as much as $4 million. But there are some who can afford them, with just 50 units still for sale. Kyle and Yumi say it's finally starting to feel like home.
As new products come out on a daily basis, repairmen in Myanmar are continually challenged to keep up with the latest technologies. Let's see the next report for more.
The latest iPhone or Samsung Galaxy is a must-have product anywhere in the world, and Myanmar is no different. The country started opening up to Western investors 2 years ago after being ruled by a military dictatorship, and now there is huge demand for high-end mobiles such as these. But what happens when they break? With no official repair shops in the country's biggest city, Yangon, small independent shops are springing up.
I have to say, fixing an iPhone is easier than fixing other phones. That's because foreigners show online how to open one as soon as they buy the latest model. They also show you how to change the spare parts at the same time.
But getting those parts can be very difficult, and it's the same for modern cars. American manufacturer Ford has opened up its first showroom, and says it started a training program for local staff. But the company admits training to be a Ford mechanic takes as long as going to medical school.
Master Technician is a 5-year training program and investment of time for these fantastic vehicles and to be able to, so it's quite an investment. Our focus now is on the people here and developing them.
There are few service centres operated by the big manufacturers, so most car owners are forced to come to independent mechanics. And a lot of modern vehicles now require a computer diagnostic tool. Getting one of them here is hard enough, but finding out how to work it is another struggle altogether. Most garages can only fix older cars, so Saw La Yos is always busy, as he's trained himself how to repair the newest models.
We can't get any training in order to work out how to fix the latest technology. We have to study thoroughly the cars that come in to get fixed. If we don't know how to do something, we have to ask some more experienced mechanics. Then we review and check what we've done. It's hard work not to make any mistakes.
Myanmar is changing at a rapid pace, and with new products coming out every day, repairmen and mechanics are having to work overtime just to keep phones ringing and cars on the road.
And we're joined now by Daniel Roth for a look at the international media in Media Watch. So Daniel, I understand we're discussing billionaires today.
Yes, mostly. Focusing in on philanthropy, the giving of billions by billionaires.
By billionaires, yes.
So the first piece that we're talking about is from the Huffington Post. The Prince of Monaco graced the Huffington Post with his presence.
Ooh.
And was writing about philanthropy, kind of showering praise on people who give, essentially, which, you know, sounds simple enough. People give their money, you should give them some praise.
Right.
And he's talking about the 21st century, how philanthropy has kind of developed. So philanthropists think of their giving as business ventures almost. So they're almost venture philanthropists. And he's talking about how this is all very good and this is what the world needs, especially now as growth is slowing and inequality is growing. And it's interesting because in the whole piece, he's talking about really what's happening without thinking about the systemic change. He's talking about systemic change, but he's not really thinking exactly how he's going to make systemic change.
Is he thinking about Monaco? Is he thinking, beyond? Like where
he's thinking about the world. He's set up the Prince's Prize for Philanthropy, which on paper looks as 3 Ps. It makes sense, but
right. This is Grace Kelly's son, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I think that's true. Yes.
Right.
But so CNN came out recently with the list came not from CNN, but they came with an analysis of the top 50 American philanthropists. And Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan are the number 1.
Oh, of course. And they're also the youngest, if I'm not mistaken, aren't they?
Yeah, they're 28 and 29 years old.
Unbelievable.
And so they gave $1 billion, okay?
Right.
The next 5 on the list gave $2 billion.
Right. Now, I just have to ask, did they just give $1 billion? Wasn't it like stock options or something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, in a number of different ways they gave. And actually, one of the notes is that most of these billionaires, the top 50 philanthropists, give primarily to education and health, hospitals, things like that, universities, things you can have your name on the wing of a building.
Of course.
And not so much to alleviating poverty.
Taking a somewhat cynical perspective on this, I mean, to what extent is this a tax write-off, and to what extent is it good PR?
Well, it is good PR, first of all. It is a tax write-off. It's also good. Look, what I was saying before about there's kind of a difference between systemic change and giving.
Right.
There's a difference between charity and justice.
Sure.
And I think what philanthropy does and what these people are a part of is a system of charity that doesn't do anything to necessarily equalize power in the world or the flow of the major flow of money, but they are giving. So while they're not creating, as Robert Reich puts it in the New Yorker piece that I read, that is giving even further analysis about it, what's needed, economist Robert Reich was explaining what's needed is systemic change. Democratic systems, not philanthropy, will lead to the end of poverty.
Right. So you you would, from your perspective, or using his perspective, would say that this money really needs to be invested in political change. Is that what you're saying?
In part, yeah. I mean, I think that political change, systems that regulation to the markets, that's a lot of what Reich talks about, former Secretary of Labor in the U.S., regulating markets and creating rules so that money can't just flow up as we're seeing it now. Right. These are the keys to actually creating systemic change, as opposed to the kind of change that philanthropy creates, which is on the ground, immediate change for some people sometimes.
Also breaking the cycle of poverty, where you essentially invest in schooling, invest in healthcare. Anyways, we have to end our discussion here. Thank you very much, Daniel Roth. We have to end here. Thank you very much for watching us. Please send us your comments via the feedback button on our website and Twitter, and join us again tomorrow.